Hello peepers. Welcome to our channel. Today I would like to share a summary of a Korean mystery movie called The Chase. Spoilers ahead. Take care and enjoy. The story focuses on the life of a grumpy, stingy landlord named Shim Deok-soo. Deok-soo is old and he is living alone. He is known as a rich old guy who sometimes harasses his tenants for rent. As a landlord, he often rides around the RE district to check his buildings, and also occasionally works as a locksmith. One day, after waking up in the morning and cleaning himself, Deok-soo visits one of his tenants, Mr. Choi, asking him for rent. He is so harsh toward Mr. Choi. Mr. Choi's guests, two female church volunteers who came to give free food, even look disturbed by Deok-soo's behavior. Gaining nothing from Mr. Choi because he has no money to pay rent. Deok-soo rides his bike to visit other tenants. On the way to the city center, he stops by when he sees police evacuate an old man's body from the river. He also meets a young girl, Ji-yoon, who rents room 205 in his building and is always late to pay the rent. The girl, like usual, still has no money to pay him. Deok-soo later visits a Toast cafe to collect rent when the police called him. An old man's dead body is found in a basement room in one of his buildings. It seems like the man has died for a long time, and because he is staying alone, no one notices. That night, Deok-soo comes to Mr. Choi's room to ask for rent again. Mr. Choi still has no money to pay, but he later invites Deok-soo to have dinner with him. It is revealed that Mr. Choi was a former detective. He tells Deok-soo that all the old people who were found dead recently must be killed by someone. All in all, it's probably not just a normal death. Mr. Choi also explains that similar cases happened 30 years ago, but the police haven't caught the murderer. After having dinner together, Deok-soo goes to Ji-yoon's room only to overhear that she can't pay the rent because she has to send money to her mother. Somehow Deok-soo pities the girl and he decides to leave without asking for rent again. That night, Mr. Choi sleeps with his broken house door opened and he is awakened by the sound of the wind. However, when he went to check outside, someone strangled him from behind. The next morning, Deok-soo comes to Mr. Choi's house to repair his lock, but he is taken aback when he sees Mr. Choi's dead body. Not long after that, when Deok-soo's body still can't move, two female church volunteers come inside only to see the same terror scene. Later, the two volunteers throw the blame on Deok-soo, telling police about his harsh behavior when he visited Mr. Choi yesterday, asking for rent. They think that Mr. Choi might kill himself because he is upset with Deok-soo. Soon, the entire neighborhood blames Deok-soo for Mr. Choi's death, accusing him of having no morals as a human and only caring about money. One day, when Ji-yoon gets back from work, she finds her occasional roommate murdered. The killer later attacked Ji-yoon from the back, throwing her several times until her body became limp. She attempts to escape but loses consciousness when the attacker hits her head with a flower vase. The next day, Deok-soo visits the Toast cafe again. He seems to quite like the cafe's owner, a middle-aged woman named Young-soo. In the cafe, he met Mr. Choi's former detective partner named Pyung-dal. Pyung-dal determined that those death or murder cases, the same as what happened 30 years ago. He wants to persuade Deok-soo to investigate the cases with him, but Deok-soo isn't interested. However, when Pyung-dal mentions the probability the murderer will set a young woman as his next target, Deok-soo remembers about Ji-yoon. He then rushes back to his building to check Ji-yoon's room. Unfortunately, when he arrives, he sees a young man trying to break into her room. Furious with the young thug, Deok-soo chases him with his motorbike. Because of his old age, Deok-soo can't keep up and loses consciousness when the thug hits his head with a stick. Later when he wakes up, he nearly gets robbed by those youngsters. Pyung-dal arrives to save him. The two later go to check Ji-yoon's room together. They find Ji-yoon's roommate's head in the fridge, and later realize that the murderer must have kidnapped Ji-yoon, considering she is nowhere to be found. Deok-soo wants to report this case to the police, but Pyung-dal stops him. He tells him that if the police start to investigate this case, the murderer probably is gonna kill Ji-yoon. Pyung-dal then shows Deok-soo some evidence and notes from 30 years ago cases, and offers him to work together to find Ji-yoon. He also tells Deok-soo that the Toast cafe owner, Young-soo, is one of the victims, but she managed to escape. However, after the incident, Young-soo lost her memories. In the flashback, it is shown that Pyung-dal once sees the killer when the latter attacks his senior, when he was still working as a detective. Even now, he still remembers how those eyes look and is determined to catch the killer. Together with Pyung-dal, Deok-soo later visits and investigates some old people in the RE district. They eliminate the name based on observations. However, Pyong-dal seems to hold suspicions about a volunteer doctor named Na Young-hyuk. Pyong-dal thinks that they can't judge a book based on its cover. So the two have to go together to observe his activities. While Deok-soo is interrogating building decoration workers if there is something weird when Young-hyuk asks them to renovate his house, Pyong-dal confronts the doctor to collect some proof. Again, although there is no proof, Pyong-dal is sure that Na Young-hyuk is the real killer. Meanwhile, the police are still suspicious that Deok-soo is probably the killer. Considering his occupation as a locksmith, he can enter any room he wants. At the same time, Ji-yoon is shown to be locked in an unknown place, feeling numb and can't move her body. Things get more and more serious when Pyong-dal and Deok-soo plan to break into Na Young-hyuk's house. Pyong-dal will follow Na Young-hyuk to the supermarket while Deok-soo tries to break into his house to collect some evidence. His house is big and looks like a labyrinth, but nothing seems suspicious. However, there is one room Deok-soo has trouble breaking into, and he starts to think that Ji-yoon is probably locked in that mysterious room. Unfortunately, after following Young-hyuk for a while, Pyong-dal loses track and is confronted by some thugs who previously attacked Deok-soo. He is later stabbed by one of those thugs. At the same time, Deok-soo tries his best to open the door, slamming the lock again and again. Na Young-hyuk later catches Deok-soo trying to break into that room. Deok-soo confronts him. He seems sure that Ji-yoon must be locked in the room. Young-hyuk denies the accusation. Suddenly, Pyong-dal shows up with a pistol and forces Young-hyuk to let them enter the room. Instead of Ji-yoon, Deok-soo sees a room full of opium. Young-hyuk later kneels in front of them, begging them not to tell the police that he plants opium for his wife's medication. Pyong-dal refuses to believe that Young-hyuk isn't the real killer and keeps pressing him. However, Deok-soo later finds out Pyong-dal is wearing a hospital necklace, stating that he is an Alzheimer's patient. Feeling that all their efforts are wasteless, Deok-soo and Young-hyuk call the hospital to take Pyong-dal back. Deok-soo later apologizes to Na Young-hyuk and goes home. However, he is still thinking about Ji-yoon. Deok-soo suddenly remembers Mr. Choi telling him about an old dog seller who is also missing, and he decides to check him out. At the same time, the police visit the church, asking them about old people's name lists who often come for free food. The priest mentions the dog seller who seems to have never appeared in their church recently. Meanwhile, arriving at the dog seller's house, Deok-soo finds his dead body hanging in the middle of the room. He also finds a patchwork that reminds him of one of his clients who asked him to repair their door. Deok-soo then rushes to that client's house where he finds some proof and photos that that client is the killer. The police also arrive at that place. At first, he wants to arrest Deok-soo, but after seeing all those proofs, he wants to help Deok-soo catch Do-shik. Later, the police and Deok-soo go to Do-shik's workplace. He denies all Deok-soo accusations and they are involved in a brief fight. The young Do-shik easily overpowers Deok-soo, hitting him and even kicking him several times. Do-shik also hits the police before escaping. Deok-soo tries to chase him but he never keeps up. Unfortunately, during the run and chase, Do-shik is suddenly hit by a car and then dies. The following day, the police announced officially that Bae Do-shik is the one who killed old people around Ari district. However, something seems off to Deok-soo since Ji-yoon is still disappeared and Do-shik is too young to be the same killer in the murder cases 30 years ago. Deok-soo thinks that there must be another killer. Desperate to find Ji-yoon, Deok-soo then goes to the Toast Cafe to ask Young-soo. Although Young-soo is still traumatized by the kidnapping, she tells Deok-soo that the kidnapper probably has 6 fingers. However, she admits that she doesn't remember his face because the kidnapper never let him see his face. Deok-soo later decides to visit Na Young-hyuk again to make sure once again that he isn't the killer. When Na Young-hyuk checks his pulse, Deok-soo recognizes the wound on his finger. Deok-soo then confronts Na Young-hyuk whether he once had 6 fingers. Na Young-hyuk is cornered. He then hits Deok-soo's head before taking him to the secret room behind the opium garden where he locks Ji-yoon. He says that he is so late taking care of his disabled wife. He kidnapped Ji-yoon to make the young girl disabled so that she can take over his old wife's place. Although she will be disabled, at least he will get a young pretty wife. He also tells Deok-soo that the day he killed Ji-yoon's roommate, he met Bae Do-shik and immediately planned to throw all the blame on him. When Young-hyuk is about to cut his wife's hand, Pyong-dal suddenly shows up after escaping from the hospital. While he is fighting Na Young-hyuk, he asks Deok-soo to take Ji-yoon out of that room. Another flashback shows that some Pyong-dal's memories have been messed up. When he was young, he could save his senior, but because he was too afraid, the killer escaped. That's why he suffers from Alzheimer's, because he doesn't want to remember those bad memories. Na Young-hyuk is still too strong for Pyung-dal. He shoots Pyung-dal and proceeds to shoot his wife before running after Deok-soo and Ji-yoon. Heavy rain is pouring outside and Ji-yoon's limp body makes it hard to move. Deok-soo hides Ji-yoon's body to fight Na Young-hyuk. Not long after that, Pyung-dal, who regains his consciousness, comes to help him. In the end, they defeat Na Young-hyuk together. In the closing scene, Pyung-dal is shown visiting Mr. Choi's tomb while Deok-soo is hospitalized. Ji-yoon sits beside him, having recovered from all her wounds. Not long after that, Young-soo also comes to visit. The case is closed and the district is safe again. Don't forget to check our other videos, peepers. Like, subscribe, comment, and turn on notifications for more Asian movies recap. See you in the next updates.